Oscar wonders if we might be able to see a little bit of the error helper documentation. Yeah, this is actually in the developer's guide on concrete5.org. If you look down in System for Error Handling, you can see that this is down here. It's very basic stuff. This is how you load it. All you have to do is add to it, and then there's a function called has. So this returns true on an error object if errors have been added to it. So that's what we're actually checking behind the scenes when we determine whether we should show the dialog box or not with errors in it. And then there are a couple different methods for showing it. So output prints out an HTML list, just an unordered list with CSS class of CCM error. So you'll see this throughout concrete5 styled as, big red list or something, but you can style it however you'd like. And then you can also get the list of errors. Get list just returns an array of strings. And then finally, you can, so then, and then of course, there's some things built in behind the scenes. If we take a look into the actual object itself, when you're adding an E could be it's usually going to be a string, which you've seen us do already. If you actually add, you can actually add another error object to a new error object, and it will take care of merging the existing errors into the new one. And then the E that you're adding could also be an exception, and if it is, it will automatically populate the error with the exception message. And in general, it's nice to use this object, even if it is super lightweight, because concrete5 does look for it in certain spots. And in the future, we could very well extend this to do a little bit more than it actually does. Like, it would be pretty nice if this supported you could log an error. If you could, when you throw an error, actually keep track of a code or something along with it, and then something else could take care of actually logging certain errors, things like that. Tom asks, can a missing or incorrect field be highlighted or have the error appear above the form field that needs attention? How would that work so you don't lose entered form data when there's an error? Well, you shouldn't ever lose entered form data in a block context, at least, because the dialog box never goes away. So when you're submitting it, it pops open an overlay above it telling you that there are problems. But it will, once you close that, the existing window is exactly the same as it was before it submits. And then if you're actually doing a single page or something that uses this, if you're using concrete5's built-in form input stuff, we take care of making sure that the data is preserved on post. However, your first question is a little bit trickier. In order to actually do what you're suggesting, you would probably have to use the AutoJS method. So instead of using this server-side validation, you'd have to do client-side validation, which would also take care of highlighting the fields and making sure that they had that treatment that you wanted them to have. Oscar asks, could you do Ajax checking if an email is available or if a password is long enough? Excuse me. Yeah, you could. I think this is another example of where the AutoJS method is a bit preferable because then at that point you're actually using JavaScript, and it doesn't really tie into the server side block validation. But all of those all of those different routines actually are JavaScript based. So you could definitely use a tool script, which we kind of went over in the last session. You could use a tool script for a block to actually check to whether whether a password was available and or long enough. I think all of those password generators have JavaScript-based algorithms to see whether they're of sufficient complexity. So yeah, that's the difference between JavaScript client-side validation, what we would advocate using JavaScript for, and then what is typically more useful to be done on the server. Thanks for bearing with my coughing. It's being a real bear. All right, we're going to move right along. We're going to talk about some more utility functions that you can put into your blocks to make them more useful in a concrete5 environment. So the next thing I want to talk about is search. Search is kind of it's typically a tough, it's a challenging subject because search is always, Google I think has kind of Google has kind of spoiled us with just how good their search is generally. But concrete5 has some built-in search functionality, and we are going to talk about how that works, specifically about how blocks can leverage, can make themselves useful in that searching capacity. So I'm going to show my screen. Here you can see in my simple site, I have a search form. I have no results because I haven't actually searched yet. And if I search for about, I get a couple pages. And I obviously get the about page because it has a title named about. But I also, on that page, there's some highlighted content there. And then I also get the home page because there is a term on the home page that matches my search. And that term's about. And you can see that that is actually content found on the page. This is not something in a meta tag somewhere. This is actually in a content block. So the question is, how does concrete5 know to return the home page when I search for about? And the answer is there is a function in the content block and in other blocks that returns content that is marked searchable. And I will show it to you now. Here we are currently looking at the content block controller. If I scroll through all this different stuff, there's a lot to the content block. Where is it? Here it is. This is a function that you can optionally define in your blocks. It's called get searchable content, and it's up to you to determine what you want to return in this function. So the way concrete5 does search indexing, whenever the whenever a page is either indexed through the automated jobs section, or it's updated through the interface, it is reindexed, and that data about that page is saved in a couple of different spots. And the custom attributes for a page are reindexed, and more importantly, all of the blocks on the page get run through a function which checks to see if any of them have get searchable content. And if they do, that data is placed into a database table. This is the database table that holds all of the indexed page content. So if I find the this is the entry for the home page, and you can see here that the content column here is just a long bit of text, which is indexed with where is it? It's indexed with the MySQL full text search index, and we just dumped content in there based on from the actual block contents of a page, based on whether those blocks have content here. So if you are writing any kind of block, if you're writing any kind of block that is meant to have data in it that should be searchable, you should include this method and make sure that it returns data that is valuable. For example, we also have this, I think we have this in the HTML block. We're doing something similar in the HTML block. For a while, we didn't actually include this in certain other blocks, and so then they wouldn't be searchable. I don't think we have it in the guestbook block, although that might be useful. I believe somebody added it to the RSS display. Yeah, see, it's not necessarily something you need to have all the time, but it is kind of useful. So, an example of why this might be nice to have in your site. Let me edit this page. I'll delete this Google map. Let's say I add a file here, and I have, I'm going to call this Valencia. Hopefully this will work. There's always a good reason why it doesn't when it doesn't, but it's never that nice when it doesn't. So when I search Valencia at this point, About actually shows up, and you can see that Valencia in the actual flow of the page is highlighted, and I click through, and I can see this here. And the reason for that is that the file block is returning the link name, this parameter right here, link text. It is returning that as the searchable content for the file block. Get searchable content, file link text. That automatically makes the file block searchable on pages where it shows up. So that's really all that you have to do to make something searchable in a block context in Concrete 5. It's pretty simple. And moving right along, I want to talk a little bit about a feature that we introduced a couple versions back and are still continuing to refine. This is a feature called Composer. So in Concrete 5, you can actually set up stuff to be you can actually set up sort of single-click publishing of an entire page based on a page type, based on a spot in the tree. And most of this is actually a little bit outside of the it's a little bit outside the training today, but I wanted to give a little clue into how to make your blocks work in this single-page publishing interface called Composer. So as you can see, we set up one composable type in Concrete 5 by default. It's called blog entry. It automatically publishes stuff beneath blog. And so what that means is I can type some stuff in here, and I can choose the different stuff. It has some attributes automatically showing up there. Those are actually image blocks. This is actually a content block that's showing up in here, and I can actually just publish the page with one click. It shows up here. It would look a lot nicer in the Greek yogurt theme, but I turned that theme off because it was being very slow. So what I want to talk a little bit about is how to set these up and how these blocks work in Composer. So Composer is powered through the page types. You can have you can make a page type composable by clicking this Composer button in blog entry, and that's where you set up these things. And then once you go into the defaults section for a Composer, you then click on the page defaults. You add blocks into the defaults page, and then when you click on them in this view, you can choose to include them in Composer and then give them a special name. So that's how the content block comes to show up in Composer when composing a blog entry. And it's got sample content, which is what automatically populates it, and you can include a block in Composer. Now you can include anything in Composer. Like, let's say I wanted to include an external form. I don't know why I would. So then, if I'm actually writing something, to write a new one. Actually, I don't know if the external form block will actually work. It's probably a bad example. Tags is a good example. Tags is a block that actually shows up, but it's not actually included in Composer. So you don't actually have to include all the blocks that you have in there. But one thing to keep in mind is if you actually include a block in Composer, what you're going to want to do is make sure that you include a Composer template for that block type. And that's really what I wanted to get to here. So for as long as Concrete's been around, we've had add templates and edit templates, and many of them actually just include one separate unified form. But there's a separate template for adding versus editing. In Concrete 5.4.1, when we introduced Composer, we added another type of template called Composer. It's optional, but if you want your block to be something that you can have in Composer, it's probably a good idea to include it. So this is the example of the content block that is in Composer. There are a couple things that make this interesting. One, you're gonna a composerable block template has to be able to be run in both add and edit mode, so with content or without content. So it's not running in a pop-up, it's running in a page. It's just going to be form fields primarily. I mean, it can be complex. This is a special composer template for the image, for an image, which has all this different functionality in it, and it even has some target width and height settings and all this fancy stuff. But it at its core, it has to be run in the same page as everything else here. That's sort of the point of Composer. And to do that, what that means is you can't have any conflicting names of form fields. So when adding blocks, through the UI on a page, you're only ever adding one block at a time. The block itself is self-contained, so you can name the form fields whatever you want. Unfortunately, when you're in Composer view, you might have 4 or 5 blocks on a page, and some of them might conflict. So, for example, these are 2 instances of images. I want to be able to, in one post, save both of these things. Well, that means you can't use just the post, because the image block is set up to be the image block is just set up to look at just a small section of post variables, and if you have 2 of them on one page, you're gonna have 2 blocks with the same post variables, and only the last one that shows up is going to actually get saved. So that's what this function here does. This field, and then we put the name of the post in there as well. And this might actually be a little bit hard to read because we're using concrete5 form elements. So if I do this, it might make it a little clearer as well. So now you can kind of get a feel for more what this looks like. Typically, when working with the content block, the name of the one main parameter in the content block is just named content. To make this work in Composer, we take the name of all of our form fields and we wrap it in a function called this field. And what that does is it makes it so every instance of the block on a composable interface has all of its different parameters are wrapped in an array that is different for each instance of the block on the page. So you can actually do one form submission, and it takes care of separating out all the different block parameters into their own sort of namespaces almost, and then it takes care of actually keeping all that stuff separate when you actually save the block. So that's one. You can't just take the edit form for a block and paste it into Composer and expect it to work. It might work, but in order to be really certain, that's what you're going to want to do. And so what that means is it could be challenging to make Composer work because you're going to be working with stuff that is meant to happen in an overlay, and then all of a sudden it has to happen in page with a whole bunch of stuff that you can't necessarily predict. So Composer is a little challenging to set up potentially, but if you need to do simple publishing and you want more of a blog style interface, it's It's worth the effort. I'm going to take a look at some of the chat. I believe we have a couple questions. Faust asks, do I need to worry about HTML or XML in what I feed to the search? Or should I stick with plain text? Generally what we do is we try to stick with plain text. You can kind of, we don't always do that. So if you look in the get searchable content, we aren't really, we don't really care too much. Actually, no, I totally misspoke just now. And we can check. I was thinking, why am I not seeing what I'm expecting? If we look in the database index search class, let me find where it is. Here we go. This is the function in concrete5 core that is responsible for locating all of the blocks on a page and then checking to see whether get searchable content is found within that block controller and then grabbing the text from that content block. And so, no, you don't have to worry about whether you're including HTML, because you can see here we strip the tags from the what we actually encounter in the get searchable content. And more than just that, instead of trying to, if we just strip tags, you just get one big mess of text. And instead, what we try to do is we try to sort of take the sections of content and turn them into spaces in the text, which is why if you actually look at the content here, you can kind of see that we don't it's not just one big long blurb of ugly text. We try to actually preserve some of the form of the text that we're actually working with. But to answer your question, you can pass in plain text, but if you pass in HTML tags, we will strip those. So you don't have to worry.